We begin with a long and worrisome night for some Valley mothers and their sons after their sons failed to return from a camping trip.
South Carolina this morning, the search continues in the upstate for a missing Boy Scout in Greenville County. Authorities say the boy was separated from his troop during a hike at Caesars Head State Park. Sheriff deputies and helicopters have joined in on the search.
Hello friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we're going to discuss not only the tragedy of kids who have seemingly vanished into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again, but Boy Scouts, children who are taught to survive any and all, allegedly, of Mother Nature's snares and traps. Every case is different, and all of them are completely tragic in their own way and as a whole. Here it is, folks. Boy Scouts who vanished while out in the wilderness. Some were found alive and unharmed, and others weren't so lucky. But all these cases beg the question. What could have happened to have made them seemingly forget their training and lose track of either their course or their sense of whatever it was? Why does this keep happening? Let's begin with the disappearance of Garrett Bardsley. In August of 2004, a 12-year-old boy named Garrett Bardsley from Elk Ridge, Utah, was on a scouting camping excursion with approximately 18 other Boy Scouts and 6 or 7 adult chaperones when he went missing and seemed to have just vanished into thin air. The group was spending time in the rugged Uinta Mountains. The scouts and chaperones had gotten to the campsite on a Thursday and had originally planned to leave after staying 2 nights on Saturday morning. On Friday night at around 8 p.m., however, Garrett had gotten his pants and shoes wet while fishing in a nearby pond. Because of this, his father, who was one of the chaperones, sent him back to camp alone to grab himself a dry change of clothes. The campsite was a quarter of a mile from the water and was a distance of no more than 50 paces from the fishing spot. The trail from the water to the campsite was well traveled, well established, and very easy to navigate. Garrett's father and the other adults involved were not worried at all about the 12-year-old's ability to make it to the camp and back without any trouble. This young man was a Boy Scout after all, and had been trained on and prepared for almost anything that would come his way in the wilderness, or so everyone thought. Garrett himself was confident he would be right back and went on his way to go and grab dry socks and pants, and nobody thought anything more of it. When he hadn't returned after a little while, however, the adults became concerned and started to look for him, wondering if perhaps he'd gotten hurt or turned around somehow along the trail, either to or on the way back from the camp. His father, Kevin, walked the short trail back to the campsite to see what was taking his son so long to return and make sure everything was okay. He didn't see his son or any sign of him, but he did report thinking he heard his son calling for him. He was calling Dad, but Kevin never located the source of the yelling. He continued on his way, as he wasn't sure at this point if his son was missing or not yet. More than 200 searchers and volunteers would eventually scour the area well into the night and early morning hours of the following Monday, and still found no sign whatsoever that Garrett had ever been there, let alone made it back to the campsite. The following Wednesday, though, approximately 5 days after he'd gone missing, they did find a tiny piece of evidence. A single sock, Nike brand, was found in a boulder field approximately a mere half of a mile from where his father had last seen him fishing with a group. The sock appears that it was taken off of a wet foot, wadded up, very consistent with what we know about Garrett, Summit County Sheriff Dave Edmonds said. Given the area where the sock was found, Sheriff Edmonds said it lent credence to the assumption most people were making that Garrett must have sought shelter from the frigid overnight temperatures after getting lost or turned around on the trail. They believed he had perhaps gone into a boulder field or some similar type of semi-protected area so as not to be exposed to the elements, assuming he still had on wet pants and socks. Sheriff Edmonds said when the sock was initially found that the boy at that point was presumed deceased, but that they would continue their efforts, mainly in and around that specific boulder field, to try and recover either some more clues or hopefully at least his body. Garrett was last seen wearing tennis shoes, a black hoodie, a t-shirt underneath, and a pair of sweatpants. Because the distance he was meant to travel was supposed to be such a short and simple one, the 12-year-old took no backpack or provisions to get him through any length of time lost out in the wilderness. The search effort was diminished within the week and scaled back to 50 professional search and rescue personnel. They searched both by horseback and on foot. The authorities reported that they believed Garrett had become somehow and for some unknown reason disoriented on his way back to the camp, and with temperatures reaching a low of 18 degrees Fahrenheit that night, he sought shelter somewhere like a crevice or boulder field. Since bow hunting season in Utah started, the hunters have been told to be on the lookout for the boy or his body, and authorities will have hung missing posters near the trailheads. Posters were also given out to local businesses in the area in the hopes that someone will eventually come across something that will lead to the recovery of this young boy who went missing so quickly while running a fairly easy and seemingly innocent errand while out with his father and friends on a scout camping trip. Although the official search was pretty much over after the first week, Sheriff Edmonds stated, "We're never going to stop looking." Even after the official searches were called off, Garrett's family had not given up hope, and his parents, brother and sister, appeared on the Oprah show in November of 2004 to talk about Garrett and his strange and sudden disappearance. "Garrett was always the kid who had the most fun. He was the one that made us laugh," said Garrett's father, Kevin Bardsley. His mother, Heidi, stated, "It's been very hard. Every day it was hard to have nightfall, to know it was one more day that we didn't find Garrett. We would have grown men that would come back to camp just in tears and say, 'I'm sorry we didn't find him today.'" Since 2004, there hasn't been a single sighting or additional shred of evidence as to the whereabouts of Garrett Bardsley. His father leaves room for the slight possibility that a mountain lion or other predator animal had gotten a hold of his son and killed him, but there are others who believe he crawled into a cave or something similar, seeking shelter from the cold weather overnight in that area. Despite it being summer, temperatures dropped significantly once the sun went down. There have been many different theories put forth as to what could have happened to this young boy. Everyone involved are in agreement about one thing. Nobody believes he is still alive, or even that he was from very shortly after he went missing. Whatever happened to him, it's believed by most that it happened by the end of the following day after he vanished. Garrett's parents told Oprah that there's never been any evidence at all that he had been abducted. They believe that it would have been nearly impossible for an abduction to have taken place. His father stated, "We were in 2.5, almost 3 miles back into rugged area. I don't blame myself so much as I wish I would have called out. I've also realized that I can't do that. It's not productive to do that to find my son. If I spent all the time doing that, I wouldn't get anything done in order to find Garrett." Searchers were off in the winter due to the inclement weather, but the family and authorities are still hopeful because of the hunters that roam about in the area, regardless of any inclement weather that may stop searchers in their tracks. Garrett's disappearance prompted several educational appearances about the perils of the wilderness and how quickly what happened to Garrett can happen to anyone, and what to do in case of an emergency out in the woods in several elementary schools in Summit County, the area in which all this took place. Garrett's family had a tradition of traveling to do what's described as humanitarian work over the Christmas holiday, and his parents stated that they were still going to honor that tradition in Garrett's name. He was looking forward to going to Ecuador to work, his father said. "We never thought we were going to be building a school at that time." He is referencing the fact that the family was planning on building a school to honor the boy while in Ecuador that season. Heidi stated that the building of the school and the work Garrett was so excited for has been helping the family heal and focus on other things. She said it's the memories of her son that get her through the most difficult times. "I've learned that I can't choose experiences I have in my life, but I can choose how I'm going to handle them. We could have let this tear our family apart, break up our marriage, but we chose to make something positive out of it." As her voice broke and tears started to flow down her cheeks, she continued with, "I know he knew that I loved him. The last time I saw him, he gave me a big hug. That's what keeps me going through this. I can still feel him squeeze me." To this day, there have been no additional clues or evidence found as to the whereabouts of Garrett, and his family still hope that he is found one way or another so they can at least know and have some closure. Next, we have the disappearance of Guy Howard Heckel. Guy Heckel was a member of Lynn County Boy Scout Troop No. 101 in early February of 1973, and he and his fellow scouts were out camping at Kiwanis Cabins, which run along the Cedar River, located between Palo and Toddville, for an overnight retreat. The troop were playing a game of capture the flag when 11-year-old Guy was last seen. It was Saturday the 3rd at approximately 8 p.m. when the boys were running around playing the game, and everything seemed fairly normal. During bed checks later that night, it was discovered that little Guy was missing. After an initial search by fellow troop members and the chaperones, which came up with nothing and lasted approximately 90 minutes, he was officially reported missing to the Lynn County Sheriff's Office late that same night. Reserve deputies, as well as those already on duty that night, combined with the Marion police and volunteers from the Civil Defense, searched all night through the backwater and trails, despite the ice and treacherous weather. Guy was last seen wearing a light blue nylon quilted parka, striped multicolored maroon jeans, and chuckle boots. The next day, Sunday, February 4th, a searcher found a blue parka, which was later identified by Guy's mother, Nancy, as belonging to him. It was still zipped at the bottom. In addition to 500 people searching by foot that day, there were all-terrain vehicles, horses, a helicopter, and a fixed-wing aircraft, all out looking relentlessly for any sign of the young man or where he could have ended up. Once it became dark on the 4th, the search was called off and resumed at first light the next day. On Monday the 5th, a bloodhound and a special search and rescue team, all the way from California, joined the now 250 others, searching in hopes of finding the boy. Initially, during the trip, the weather was reported as being mild. However, very shortly after it was noticed Guy was missing, snow started to fall. Investigators initially theorized the boy could have slipped, fallen into the river, and drowned, but also said they believed something else could have happened, like foul play or some sort of human element being involved. Guy Heckel was considered a good student by his teachers. He was in the 5th grade at the time of his disappearance, and lived with his parents, Nancy and Howard, as well as his 2 older sisters who were 12 and 13 years old at the time. Guy's still-zipped blue parka is to this day the only single shred of evidence ever found. Guy's cousin, Mike Mason, stated that the family believed the boy was abducted more than they believed he drowned, due mainly to the fact that his body was never recovered. It's alleged that at this time, in the early 1970s, news reports were consistently coming out accusing scout leaders of less than honorable intentions with the young boys left alone in their care. Now, the game the boys were playing, Capture the Flag, as defined by Wikipedia, is a traditional outdoor game where 2 teams each have a flag or other type of marker, and the object is to capture the other team's flag located at the team's base and bring it safely back to your own base. Enemy players can be tagged by players in their home territory. These players are then, depending on the agreed rules, out of the game. Members of the opposite team sent back to their own territory, frozen in place until freed by a member of their own team or in jail. There is a variation of this game that includes a jail area in addition to the flag on each team's territory. It's sometimes suggested that the players wear dark colors even while playing at night in order to make it harder for the opposing team members to catch a player trying to obtain the flag. At the end of the day, though, there is no proof of what the news reports were saying, at least none specifically pertinent to this case, and it was only mentioned as Guy's cousin was alleging this is the way the family was viewing the disappearance. There's been no evidence of any of the troop leaders or anyone on the camping trip that night had anything at all to do with Guy's disappearance. And by all accounts, everyone involved helped the search and investigation to the best of their ability and cooperated to the fullest. The family's reasoning stood that this game is dangerous to play while in the dark, wearing dark colors, and being made to stand alone in a dark place where you weren't allowed to move if this type of predator were in the vicinity. There is no new information on this case, and to this day, Guy's family still wonders what could have happened to him all those years ago during what was considered at the time to be a completely innocent case of a Boy Scout doing what they all did, having fun with friends and learning how to stay safe in the wilderness in cases of danger or emergency. Next up, Alvin Nelson. In September of 1961, 17-year-old Alvin Nelson was hiking in the canyons of Zion National Park in Utah with fellow troop members of his Boy Scouts. While much of what actually happened at that time is unknown, his younger sister, Dora Lee, remembers hearing something over the radio which sent chills down her spine that she would never forget. She said she was at home in Salt Lake City, Utah, in her backyard, watering the plants and listening to the radio. Suddenly, there was a report of a massive flash flood in the Narrows, which, she immediately thought, is where her brother Alvin and his best friend Frank Johnson were on their scouting trip. 5 people were swept away that tragic day, but neither the body of her brother nor his best friend were ever found. Dora Lee went on in an interview to talk about how Alvin was the man of the house, their father having left the family when they were small. It was Dora Lee, Alvin, and their mother, and they were most of the time a happy and normal family for the time. Unfortunately, their mother passed away in 1996 without ever knowing what became of her son, who was swept away apparently so long ago. Dora Lee also talked about the hope she carried with her all of that time, the time up until she finally found some semblance of an answer as to what had happened to her brother. She said over the years she would think things like, maybe something else happened, maybe they were able to get out, maybe he hit his head on something and got amnesia. Without a body, you always hope. It takes years and years before you actually believe they've got to be gone. The pain was always there. Then, 51 years later, in 2006, she finally got an answer when authorities matched DNA to a skull fragment that was found by a man swimming in the Virginia River. The DNA matched Alvin, her brother, so at least a small part of him had been found. He had in fact been swept and washed away and was simply never found for all those years. She said of the news, "It's kind of a nice birthday present, but after so many years, it really doesn't bring closure. It's been a long time." Dora Lee had turned 66 right as the news came of the DNA match. It was only about 9 at the time her brother disappeared from her and her mother's life forever. She's married now and has children of her own, which she adopted, but says there still isn't a week that does go or has gone by where she hasn't thought of her older brother and how much he is missed and loved. Springdale Police Chief Kurt Wright grew up in the area near the canyons in Utah where the flood happened that fateful day and said the flood of '61 is legendary in that particular area. He went on to state that it was something that was always on the periphery of his mind as well. "What happened to those boys?" he said. "Where had the bodies gone?" He said when the man brought the skull piece to the police, his thoughts immediately went to the missing Boy Scouts who were swept away that day, Alvin included. He stated, "That's the only thing that's never really been solved here. We've had numerous drownings since then in the Narrows, but we've always recovered the victims." He explained that he and the local medical examiner had discussed the finding of the skull piece and what it could mean, what the implications could be for opening such old wounds. The fragment sat in the evidence room as the chief was constantly reminded of how costly DNA testing was and that for such a small piece and no thought of exactly who it could belong to, it could end up being a waste of time and money. There it sat for all those years. He learned a while later about free DNA testing being done by the University of Texas to any law enforcement agency who may be in need of such a favor. This is when he decided the time was right and he submitted the skull fragment for testing. They were going to find out, one way or another, whether or not this had anything to do with the missing scouts. He tracked down relatives of both Alvin and Frank Johnson and then shipped it all off to the university. He received word about Frank first. It wasn't him. 2 days after that, he got the call that the DNA had matched missing Boy Scout Alvin Nelson and contacted his sister, who had given the DNA sample in the first place and was most probably waiting with bated breath for an answer, one way or another. Dora Lee planned on picking up the remains and burying them beneath a headstone purchased by her mother before she died in the event something like this should happen. Alvin, or at least some small part of him, would finally be put to rest. Chief Wright said, "It's nice to bring some closure to at least one of the families. It's a great feeling. But it was hard to deliver the news to the Johnson family. At least Dora Lee can get some closure now and move on. It's just amazing they can extract DNA from something that's been underwater for 50 years and in the sand and mud. It's been a fascinating case." Although the state has been discussing further archaeological digs in the area, most likely in an attempt to find what has happened to the rest of the still missing and simply vanished, Chief Wright is doubtful anything else will turn up. Dora Lee also stated, "You'd think after all these years it would be put to rest, but all the stress and the frustration just comes right back. I find this all very spiritual." This case just goes to show that it's never too late. And as our DNA technology becomes more advanced as each year passes, who knows what other cases we've discussed throughout the community and on this channel specifically will come to be solved. And finally, we have the bizarre disappearance of Jared Negrete. July 19th, 1991 was a day filled with excitement for 12-year-old Jared Negrete. Jared was a member of the Boy Scouts and was getting ready to embark on his first overnight backpacking trip into the wilderness. The group's leader, Dennis Knight, along with the excited group of young boys, entered the San Bernardino National Forest on July 19th and headed for Mount San Gorgonio. The group's leader, Dennis Knight, along with the excited group of young boys, entered the San Bernardino National Forest on July 19 and headed for Mount San Gorgonio. Reports indicate that the group were planning to hike to the summit of the mountain, which happens to be the tallest in Southern California. Unfortunately, the group would soon be struck by a tragedy that has left Jared's family in the dark for over 30 years. At around 6 p.m., Jared fell behind the pack as they were hiking the trails and passed toward the summit. At first, his disappearance wasn't noticed as a sea of bodies walked toward the summit. Some outlets report that Jared got tired during the hike and was instructed to stay behind and wait for the group. While the truth is murky, the story of what happened next remains consistent. As the troops settled down for the night, setting up camp and placing their tents, Jared's absence was noted. Dennis Knight immediately summoned the authorities. According to Knight, the plan was to hike up the 11,500-foot mountain the next morning, with the group making a base camp at a dry lake just a few miles away from the summit. With Knight realizing that Jared was missing, a wide-scale search of the area was conducted, with local law enforcement and search and rescue agencies quickly joining in on the search. According to the Los Angeles Daily News, the search for Jared spanned over 16 days, costing around $500,000. ATVs, dog units, helicopters, local law enforcement, and search and rescue crews all scoured the land around the camp and where Jared had gone missing, but failed to find any sign of the boy. Interestingly, during their search, they did find some bizarre items that were later confirmed not to belong to Jared. They found a microwave oven, cannabis plants, a Boy Scout shirt, a backpack and a canteen, and a wallet containing $130. If these items didn't belong to Jared, who did they belong to, and why were they left abandoned in the wilderness? It seems that Jared's case has more questions than answers, even after 30 years. The 2,000-plus volunteers who took time out of their lives to help search for Jared managed to find a few clues. While searching, they found candy wrappers, beef jerky wrappers, and footprints made by Jared's shoes, as well as his backpack. Was Jared a victim of foul play, or perhaps he'd been kidnapped? Kidnapping was later ruled out, and another mysterious clue would lead some to believe that something otherworldly was involved with Jared's disappearance. During the search, Jared's camera was also found, and while most of the pictures were the local landscape, there's one photo that vividly sticks out. In the photo, Jared's eyes and nose can be seen, and some people believe that something is lurking in the background of the photo. The police theorized that Jared had taken the ominous last picture at night, and that the strange background is caused by Jared's camera flash. Unfortunately, despite logging over 40,000 man-hours in the search for Jared, no sign of him has ever been found. His parents still desperately search for the truth of what happened to their little boy. As with most unsolved disappearances, there are a plethora of theories, while the most prevailing theories believe that he either fell down a hill or embankment, or simply got lost in the park and succumbed to the elements. There are also those who believe that the bizarre and unknown forces in the national park have something to do with Jared's disappearance, as there are hundreds upon thousands of people who disappear in our national parks each year. Jared's parents believe that his body is possibly amongst boulders, rocks, and dirt, but this theory has never been confirmed. Jared's family still hold out hope that one day they will receive a phone call that their son will finally be reunited with them one way or the other. Well, folks, there you have it. Just a few of the missing Boy Scouts who vanished without a trace and without warning, only to either never be found again or to have been found so long after the initial disappearance it was a shock altogether. So what do you think of these strange disappearances? I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. If you'd like to see more videos like this, check out the playlists that we have on our channel. These playlists showcase our best content and videos that many of you may have never seen before. So check them out and see what you've been missing.